Have you ever thought about reinventing your life professionally or personally, but didn't know where to start or thought it was too late? Join me as guests share how they were able to overcome their fears and reinvent their lives. And I'll also have experts on to share tips on how to start your own reinvention because, as you will see, it is never too late. On today's episode, we'll be speaking with Lindsay, a marketing executive turned ADHD coach and a voice for neurodivergent thinkers. A recent late in life diagnosis, coupled with the experience of caring for two young kids during a global pandemic, led Lindsay to rethink her career and ultimately her life's purpose. As she worked to understand her own brain diagnosis, her deep dive into all things ADHD evolved into a passion for neurodiversity support, education, and advocacy. You can learn more about our coaching or book a discovery call at The Wavy Brain on Instagram or www.thewavybrain.com. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for being on the show today. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, Kim. How's it going?
Good. You and I had met at a networking event last year in Boston, and we were sharing some stories. I was telling you about how my son has ADHD and how I a few years ago was diagnosed as well, which explains a lot. And I wish that I had been diagnosed sooner. And you were like, oh, me too. So yeah. I would love for you to share your story because I know that's part of your reinvention story. So I'll ask you, how did you come about being an ADHD coach, coming from marketing and, sort of totally reinventing your life?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to share, and I hope that it maybe can help, others in the process. But yeah, as you mentioned, my reinvention story, if you will, is partially due to my ADHD diagnosis, but then also partially due to, just some wanting to reinvent and, some really difficult and intense inward self-reflection on me feeling a bit sort of dissatisfied in the career path I chose. Mm-hmm. So it kind of, is both. So I guess I should start by sharing that, I started my career early on, right after college, working for Nike in New York. And, I was an athlete growing up. I played lacrosse in college. And, so working for Nike made a ton of sense for me. I wasn't really sure what kind of, though I studied marketing communications, I wasn't quite sure what I really wanted to do. But so I just sort of was drawn to Nike as a brand that we studied, in college and from a marketing communication standpoint. And I happened to also have a friend who was the admin to the PR department, who was my roommate. At FIT. Yeah. And we're still friends now. And she was the admin to the PR department and was like, Lindsay, come work for Nike. They're looking for an admin to the marketing department. And of course I interviewed and, this really intense interview process. And luckily it worked out. And, in working with my boss, she, though I wasn't clear what I wanted to do, it was clear to her that I didn't want to be an admin, forever. This was a stepping stone. It was an opportunity to learn and to, meet people and try out sort of different roles and, go from there. So she took me under her wing. She's a mentor of mine today, still, life mentor, I would call her. And she, gave me a lot of opportunities. She let me have these hybrid roles that allowed me to try out different functions within Nike and, meet a lot of people and just sort of experience what it's like to work at an incredible brand, especially in a geography in the New York office. Fortunately, I guess I would share, when you start your career at Nike, it sort of sets you up for like pretty great opportunities after that, right? Like Nike's a great
first job.
Yeah, it's like a great brand to have on your resume. And it just sort of like accidentally set my career path like in a certain direction. I'm like working at Nike with all these like high powered, incredibly inspiring women and men, of course. But, so I see all this sort of like aspiration and ambition around me. And so I immediately was like, yeah, I'm on that train. Like I'm going, right? I'm going to find another big brand. I worked at Nike for 6 years and just was like, it's time to try something new. Let's find another big brand where I can do the same sort of thing, like continue to climb the proverbial corporate ladder, if you will. And so that's what I did. while I was there, so my next brand,
Mm-hmm.
my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and I decided we wanted to move to San Francisco for a while. Let's try the West Coast while we're young. We're both from the East Coast. Let's go for it. And,
Yeah.
I fortunately interviewed with a few different brands, but I landed at Levi's. And it was an incredible experience. So now I have like these two heritage American brands under my belt. I am just feeling really, career focused and ambitious. And then all of a sudden, I start to experience these out of nowhere panic attacks.
Wow.
And I was like, what's happening? This is crazy. And it was, my boyfriend, like I said, now husband, was working for Levi's as well. And I would call him like 3 days a week and I'd say, Adam, meet me down in the courtyard. I'm freaking out. I'm losing it. What's happening? And I would just burst into tears at him. And I could not figure out what it was. I was like, I think something is wrong with me. Like, I think I have to go to the doctor. Like, I'm panicking. I can't breathe. I have shortness of breath. And so I went to he was like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry, but I have no idea. I can't. Doctor.
Wow.
Yeah. So I go to the doctor and she says, Lindsay, tell me about your symptoms. And I just unloaded on her. Right. So I shared that we just moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. So new city.
Yeah.
My, boyfriend and I were in a new living situation because we didn't live together when we were in New York. I was in a much more higher level job than I was before. So I felt this internal pressure to perform. It paid really well. I had a higher title. Like, I just wanted to show that I was worth it. I was worth the investment, right? I was in a much more visible job. So I was, in a marketing function where I was essentially the quarterback to all these other like cross-functional roles. So I had to get up and talk to a room of, 20 people and tell them about our seasonal story for the year. Wow. And for the season, Kim, oh my goodness, I'd get up, I'd start talking, and I knew the stuff. That wasn't the problem. I created it, and all of a sudden I would forget what I was saying.
Yes.
Oh my God, I would forget what I was saying. My mind would go blank. I'd start thinking about dinner or something totally random. And then I'd be like, oh shit. Yeah. And I'd fill the space with something random. And then I'd look around the room and I would say, oh God, did everyone just notice my total snafu? Did they think I'm weird now? And I got to keep going. And oh shit, now my face is so red and now I'm sweating. Can people see that I'm sweating?
Yes.
And then, exactly. Yeah. A complete internal spiral of anxiety and nonsense. And, I don't want to say nonsense because it's not serious, but just, I was really hard on myself. And so I share my doctor all this and she's like, oh yeah, you have ADHD and you've had it your entire life.
You're so fortunate that you found this doctor because those things happened to me, but they would give me Klonopin, anti-anxiety pills. Right. And then I used, alcohol and cigarettes to help with my anxiety. So this is awesome. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. It's part of the reason why I wanted, and we'll get to how I got to where I am now in just a second, but it is a big, what you just shared, the fact that like still in the medical community, there are, sort of like preconceived notions about what ADHD is. Some doctors don't want to, they don't recognize it right away. They, they misdiagnose, especially women who don't have those classic stereotypical symptoms, which are like a little boy who can't sit still in his classroom, is constantly talking out of turn and misbehaving. A lot of times women are misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression when in reality, it's the anxiety and depression that is a result of the undiagnosed and untreated ADHD. Yeah. That's not always the case, but it's becoming a lot more apparent, especially, as women reach different phases of their lives. So that's basically what happened to me. Like I had managed my whole life with ADHD. so when she told me about this diagnosis, it made a ton of sense. It was like, okay, duh, that like, I was always the creative one. I was always I luckily was an athlete. So sports was really my outlet. And luckily I played lacrosse in college. And so I had to get my grades up. I was always like a B, C student. So I had to get my grades up in order to play. And but I had this big life transition where there was all this change at once that compounded. And that's essentially what brought it out. So ADHD isn't something that you just develop. It changes the way it impacts you over certain times of your life, and especially during major transition times. And that's why a lot of women, especially now, are being diagnosed after they have kids, because your, executive function is highly impaired, because now you have this like major complication of a kid and maybe a career and
you're exhausted.
Schedules, you're exhausted. Like you're not taking care of yourself. You're only thinking about the baby. And there's a lot of different things. So unfortunately, however, I got the diagnosis, I took the medicine, and I basically ignored it. I just was like, okay, cool. I'll take the medicine. I'll keep being career oriented. It's just me and my boyfriend. We don't have a house. We don't have kids. All I want to do is climb this corporate ladder. And I do. I just keep doing it. And then unfortunately, about, maybe 6 months or so after I was diagnosed, my father, who, by the way, once I was diagnosed, I called my dad immediately and was like, Dad, this explains you, everything about you, everything. Oh my God,
it's so funny.
I was like, thanks, Dad. And now I know where I got my dimples and my ADHD from. So he unfortunately passed away unexpectedly. And this ties into the story because, if you've ever had a major loss like that, it really, at least for me, really made me question what is life, right? Like he was 58 years old. He was so young, out of nowhere, had a heart attack. God. We were all blindsided. And, it just made me really question, like, what am I doing? Like,
how short life is. Yeah.
Yeah. Life is so short. What am I doing all day, every day? All I do is work. And, I had this great job that was giving me these incredible experiences. And luckily I actually met my husband at Nike. Thank goodness. Like I was very fortunate and thankful, and I was learning a ton, but I had this sort of like twinge of like slight questioning of what I was doing. So fast forward, my boyfriend and I get married at this point. I keep climbing that ladder. I take an amazing job at Nest, which was bought by Google. So I worked for Google for a while. We moved back to the East Coast, where my husband took a job working for Converse. I was heading up brand for Keds here in Boston. And so I'm climbing that ladder, or as my therapist would call it, the rush hour of life, where you decide to have a couple kids, buy a house, keep focusing on your career, forget focusing on yourself. And then the pandemic hit.
And is a big reinvention.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was happening before. I will say, after Keds, I kind of, throughout this time of this sort of like rush hour, if you will, I did continue to feel this, like, what am I doing? Like all I was doing was working, and I knew there had to be more than that. And yes, I was traveling. Yes, we were having fun, but I was kind of looking ahead like, oh shit, now I'm 35. I got to think about having kids now. I didn't freeze any eggs. Like, what are we going to do? And so I was saying that I was feeling this sort of itch, this like slight dissatisfaction with my career. And I was sort of making note of the things that I really liked to do in all of my, my respective jobs. And the one key thread that kept coming up was people. Like I love being in front of people. I love, events and sort of, experiences. And I loved helping, like whenever I loved when I was working for a big brand like Nike or Levi's, and we would do something with that big brand that was impactful to the community and to people. Yeah. And I loved that. So I was just like, okay, where am I going here? at a certain point, I was like, you know what, maybe it's that I just keep working for these big brands and I need to pivot to relevant yet tangential, vertical that's still within this like marketing communication space, but is in a different world. Like I kind of felt like, if I go to Converse, it's going to be the same shit, different company. Let's do something different.
Right.
So,
mix it up.
Yeah. So I got an opportunity to work for a real estate developer here in Boston who was looking to build out a bit more like strategy and operations with their field marketing team. So, they have these open air experiential, like mixed use shopping centers.
Oh, cool.
And, each property has a marketing manager on the property. And so I felt like, hey, this is a great opportunity for me to try something different. So then the pandemic hits. And this notion of like, okay, something is really off. The pandemic made it turned everything upside down.
Yeah, it did.
And it really made me wonder, like, what am I doing? And I liked working for this real estate developer, but there was something that was off. Like there wasn't any culture. There wasn't any there was like this box that you had to work in, that everybody had to work in exactly the same way. I just felt increasingly suddenly out of nowhere, my self-esteem. So this is at this point, I've had my daughter, I have 2 kids. My daughter at this point, I'm pregnant throughout the pandemic. Oh yeah. She was born in August.
That you have a little baby still.
Oh yeah.
Get that. Yeah.
Well, she's 2.5 now, but yeah, she was born in August of 2020. So right in the middle of the pandemic. Oh, wow. The medicine that I should say that I rely on, at this point, because I hadn't built in any other real strategies, the medicine that I relied on, I wasn't taking while pregnant or nursing. And so here I am the last like 5 years, like on and off of my medicine. I experienced a miscarriage in between there. So again, it was like on and off. And it was terrible. And so, I have my daughter. We were forced to work from home. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, this is so much better for me. I can do this so much better from home. And, just to sort of wrap it up, this company that I was working for started to beat that drum of like, everybody's got to come back to the office. You have to like come to work. Everybody has to work in the same way. We need to see your faces, like this total like farce of, not realizing that people work differently.
Yes.
I also,
that's
totally.
Yeah.
And as I started to say, I also suddenly out of nowhere completely lost my self-esteem in the process, especially after my daughter. It was crazy, Kim, because I've always been a very, at least on the outside. On the outside, I was always very confident. On the inside, I always felt a little bit weird, but I just sort of like masked it with my fun, bubbly personality, and I just got through. And so that really shook me. I started to get depressed. I started to, out of nowhere, like my husband and I were having real problems communicating. In my head, we'd fight over, emptying the dishwasher. And then all of a sudden in my head, 5 minutes later, we're getting a divorce. I have to move to another city. How am I going to co-parent in another city because I can't afford to live in Acton anymore? And what if I just kept encountering these spirals that were really happening inside my own head.
And I'm laughing because I can relate. So that's
totally. Fortunately, my psychiatrist, I had mentioned to her, I had not been seeing a therapist at this time. I was seeing a psychiatrist who was helping me manage my medicine. I mentioned to her like, hey, I'm not doing well. I think I need a therapist. And she said, why don't you try this group therapy program that's run out of my hospital? I went, and holy shit, Kim, I hope it's okay that I'm swearing.
Yes, I love swearing.
You can edit that out.
Yes. No, leave it in.
But it was like light bulb after fireworks. I basically just, all of a sudden hearing stories of all these other people realizing that I was not the only one with ADHD was crazy, because you sort of, us with ADHD, we tend to internalize. We tend to think we're on our own.
Yes.
We have this sort of like lone soldier, like we can do it. We can muscle through. We should be able to do X, Y, Z. But then through everybody sharing these stories, it built this, it made me realize I don't know if you've seen any memes on the internet about the ADHD iceberg. There's this graphic that's out there. If you Google the ADHD iceberg, there's basically these, symptoms at the top that most people in culture think about. We're distracted, we can't sit still, we might be a little bit hyper, we might have some cognitive hyperactivity, and we have, impulsive speech and behavior. But there's this whole other iceberg under the water of all of these other symptoms that you don't think or that doctors don't even educate you on when you get diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah.
So by other people sharing their experiences, I realized, holy shit, I had no idea that any of this stuff had anything to do with ADHD. So the mood swings I was having, the depression, the lack of sleep, the feeling like I literally could never sit down. I learned of a term called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or otherwise known as ASD. And I literally almost passed out. I couldn't believe how I just was like, oh my God, that's a thing. I just thought I couldn't handle feedback.
Yes.
So as you
know,
criticism
or somebody. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's crazy, it's even perceived criticism.
Yes.
So it's not even, that person might not intend to criticize you. They might come across that way, or their tone feels off to you and it just sends you into a spiral.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I realized that the most pressing thing I needed to deal with at the time was the communication with my husband. And so I asked the group, I said, I need a relationship therapist or something. Somebody, I'm going to get divorced soon because my husband can't stand what's going on, and neither can I. And I will share, out of nowhere, I started to it really hit its peak around this time, where I had some really dark thoughts about it. And I just kept feeling like I can't fight with my brain anymore. Like, how do I fix this? Like, medicine isn't helping me anymore. And I just feel like I'm clawing uphill all the time. Mm-hmm. So in trying to find a relationship coach, somebody sent an ADHD coach to me. And I was like, oh, interesting. I didn't know this was a thing. So I started working with this ADHD coach. His name is Jim Dunn, and he's amazing. I still work with him today. And he luckily did some career stuff with me as well. I should also share that my first session with him, Kim, was literally crying hysterically for an hour.
Oh, wow.
Because I just felt so validated by all the things he was sharing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yep.
And I just felt, wow, this is crazy. And so when I was working with him, we did a lot of deep reflection on, needs, values, strengths, character strengths, understanding the things that you're good at versus the things that you want in life versus designing the sort of life that you want, right? And, as I started to think about it, none of it was in this world of marketing anymore. And I just, as we were working together and as I was diving more into this world of ADHD and neurodiversity, I found it so fascinating. And when I had some of those really dark thoughts, it all of a sudden hit me like a slap on the face. When I learned that ADHD is highly generational, as demonstrated by my dad, who probably passed it along to me. And I learned that my grandfather was dyslexic, and it turns out my sister has ADHD. And, I thought, wow, if one or both of my kids has ADHD, I have to figure out a way to be able to support them. And if I can't get my own shit together, I can't be there to help them. And so Jim told me about where he'd been trained to become an ADHD coach, this company called ADGA, which is the ADD Coaches Academy. And, to finally wrap it up here, my really long story, I'm sorry. I just sort of did some digging, and I was like, oh, let's, see if I can take this course. They have this course that you can take that's all about learning about what is ADHD. And then there's another one that's called personal transformation, and it's sort of applying that to find out how to transform. And then to take it one step further, you could take this coaching track. And within the first 3 weeks of that very first module or course I took, I literally was like, Jim, is it crazy to say to you that I want to become an ADHD coach. And he was like, absolutely not. He was like, it makes so much sense with all the stuff that you've shared with me, and working with him, I uncovered this like need and want to make a difference, right? But like in people's worlds, right? And it's so funny because here I am previously in this like big, this marketing world where you see like companies being invented and bought and sold and people on the cover of Fast Company and blah, 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 blah. And that was originally my metric of making a difference. I was like, oh, I got to go and make a difference at a big brand somewhere.
Yeah.
But then once I realized, wait a minute, that's not the kind of difference I want to make. Right. And so, it took me a long time to get there, but I realized like, I want to make a difference in people's like individual lives. Like, I don't want anyone to ever feel those like horrible and dark thoughts and feelings that I had at that time, because the world needs you, people. The world needs you. Whatever sparkle you're bringing to the world, and you are bringing a sparkle, don't let your ADHD, get in the way of that. And so that was really, that's sort of like,
wow.
Then I did this coaching course, and here I am. And, it's so rewarding, and it's hard, but what's so fun is it's way more fun to market my own business with the hope of eventually making myself rich one day versus, marketing someone else's business who's already rich. And so that's fun. I see some clients come into sessions where they're just like having a really hard week, and they're down and they're dejected and they're just, bummed. And by the end of our session, they're so much lighter and they are so much less overwhelmed, and it's so rewarding. So,
and when you found your calling, right? It's like, that's how I feel about my job. It's like, I absolutely adore it. And so it doesn't really feel like work, because when I'm in flow when I'm working, but what an amazing, you have your marketing background all with these huge companies. So I'm sure that's really helpful. So you have left marketing. You are now, this is what you do. You're an ADHD coach for, do you do teens, families, individuals, adults only? Like what do you focus on?
Yeah, it's a wide range. So I do dabble a little bit on some marketing projects on the side, just because it's still fun. But my main business is, my main business is coaching. And I work with a wide variety of clients right now. I work with some parents whose children have been diagnosed, like say at 9 or 13, and they're really learning about what is ADHD, how do I support my son or daughter, and, and then we'll eventually move into coaching their child as well. I have clients like me who have been diagnosed late in life, and some of them have been diagnosed late in life and realized that they had a diagnosis once their child had a diagnosis. I work with both men and women. My favorite is to work with men, to be honest, because seeing men go to this like emotionally vulnerable and open place is like so important. And especially, men in like the, workforce. And the other part of my business is, my company's called the Wavy Brain, and that's where my coaching practice is, but it's also a neurodiversity advisory practice as well, because I feel like, all of these companies, especially during the pandemic, started to really talk about DEI being a, diversity, equity, inclusion being a focus for them. And once I started to dive into the world of neurodiversity, I realized that culture has changed the meaning of neurodiversity. Culture has turned the term neurodiversity was coined by an Australian sociologist to demonstrate how all brains think differently. And culture has turned it into defining people with a diagnosis.
Wow.
So people call me neurodivergent, but I am a neurodivergent. I am a neurodivergent individual, but us as humans, we are neurodiverse. We all think and process differently. So the reason why I do some advisory work for companies is because I also, I'm very passionate about weaving neurodiversity into company core core company values as well as any DEI, strategies. So especially because of my corporate experience, I just feel really strongly that it's like such an untapped lever, right? Like imagine if we don't have to all sit behind these desks all day, and it's okay to use fidget toys at a meeting, and it's okay to get up and walk around if you need to, and it's okay to do all these things that help our brains function. Yeah, I don't know.
It just reminds me of that because, like you said, I mean, how it's like the school system. So my son is 17; yes. He's in 11th grade. How can you expect people to conform? I mean, that's why people have been so miserable for so long. Like I can remember working for Harvard and being in meetings, and I did look like a weirdo because I could not sit still. My leg was going like this.
Oh, always
different stuff. I had to get up and go, and people were just like, "What is wrong with her?"
Yeah.
But my son, I mean, thank God schools are getting better, but they're still teaching the core curriculum. You have to take, your I forget what those things are called, the testing, the MCAS. And so what they're doing is giving him more time for stuff. So I'm hoping that people like you will be able to, I mean, I know you're working with corporations, but people that do this work can start working with the school systems because not everybody learns the same either. Just like we don't work the same.
Totally. And time is wonderful. Extra time is wonderful. That is not going to solve it though, right? Yeah. You need to be able to work in a way that works for you and learn in a way that works for you. While I was working at Nike, I got called out on several occasions because I doodled in meetings.
Oh yeah. My son's a doodler.
Yep. And when I was in the admin role, people around me would be like, Lindsay, don't you need to take notes? Like you need to follow up on this stuff. And I would like doodle and note take, like, because that was my way of focusing. And, so yeah, I mean, I love working, with all types of individuals, to be honest. Like I have 13-year-olds, I have, people just like me. I have people that suspect they're diagnosed and, they're learning about it, and I can help them manage getting a diagnosis. I can't provide a diagnosis, but I can help you, find a doctor. And, so a lot of times people with ADHD don't get diagnosed because it's another thing on your to-do list that overwhelms you. So if we're working together, that's a thing that I can help hold you accountable around, and I can help you figure out the best way to keep that on your to-do list and actually get it done.
I love that there's so much information out there now about ADHD. Yeah. There's a lot more than there was, right? Yeah. And then number two, that there's coaches, because when I did not know I had ADHD. Yeah, I would go to a therapist and they were like, well, try some anti-anxiety, try this. You probably have depression. And it just now that I know I have ADHD, I'm like, oh my God. And I need tools. I need systems to put in place. That's what helps me. And my self-esteem has increased significantly because that I know, but also because I have learned those tools. Yes. And so I think it's great to have a coach, because my son, I didn't know this, but when he was diagnosed, we did ignore it. We thought he'd grow out of it. And the school thoughts didn't tell us otherwise.
Yeah. And that's a very common belief.
And when he didn't, and it exacerbated when he was in high school because things got more complex, we were like, oh shit, we kind of effed up. But I had said, oh, maybe he needs a therapist. And the therapist was like, Kim, he doesn't really want to talk. That's not what he needed at that time. He needed a coach, somebody that's going to say, hey, guess what? You have this, your brain thinks like this. That's why, like you said, when you found this group, you were like, oh, or cried the first hour you were with your coach. You finally feel like you're not on that island alone. You're not crazy. And, so I love the work that you do. I think it's critical.
Yeah. Yeah. It's thank you. I really appreciate that. And, you mentioned just about like building the strategies. There's this slightly cringy, but I hold on to it because it makes so much sense, thing that they share in coaching school, where they say the pills don't build the skills. And it's so true. That is literally the epitome of my experience. I took the pills and I ignored it, and then shit hit the fan. Yeah. So,
well, because you're masking it, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Right. I take medication for ADHD which totally helps me. It's a very tiny dose. It's Adderall, and it helps me focus.
Yep.
But you can take Adderall and game all day if you want. You can focus on the wrong things, but you're right. So, but if I didn't have those skills of like, I have to set a timer when I know I'm working on something, those little ADHD skills, if I wasn't investigating and doing that work because of Seamus, my son, I would probably still be suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Well, I'm so glad that you found found somebody to diagnose you, and you found this sort of like relief in what you were feeling as well. The last thing I'll just share really quickly is you brought up the idea of a therapist. Therapy and coaching are very complementary. To your point, coaching is very much more focused on like the current moment and very real time. So coaching is a very collaborative process, and a client will come to a session with the topic, like, here's what I want to work on right now, or here's what I'm struggling with, or can we verbally process through XYZ? And it's my job to very actively listen and, ask questions to dig further and explore, perhaps challenge some like limiting beliefs or thoughts that are happening. But if you find that you're not ready for something like that for coaching and you want to stick to therapy, if you do have ADHD, find a therapist that at least has a very solid understanding of ADHD.
Yes.
Because otherwise they might make recommendations that don't work for your brain, and it's going to start to drive you crazy because you're like, why, my therapist, this isn't working, and I've heard that happen quite a bit, where a therapist is like, oh, try this. And it's like, well, that doesn't work for me. And then you just get frustrated. And so, I'll just to share that.
Yeah, that happened to me. I spent so much time, but yes, I can see how they go together. And the therapist that I had gotten for Seamus did specialize in ADHD, but there was a difference. Seamus at that time was like 16. He didn't really have like emotional stuff to talk about. At that time, a coach would have done him better because it would have sort of perhaps educated him. But no, I can see where the two would work well. Yeah. And I think it's good for people to, my doctor, my general practitioner, what's it called here?
PCP, GP.
Yeah, she's the one that said, Kim, you should, because I would go see her and she's like, how you doing? I'm like, oh, I would like complain about everything. Yeah. And she's the one that diagnosed me. I was like, oh my God, I never even thought about this. So then now, thankfully, I can, do the work that I need to do for my son, like you were saying, for your kids.
Yeah.
So it is amazing. You did a complete reinvention. However, all of that work that you did, of course, adds on to like your marketing, the leadership skills, working with clients and all of that experience that you get to offer your clients is excellent. So
yeah, I love the stories that you're telling about reinvention because they're all so different. Each reinvention story is unique, and some of it's very personal, some of it's very just like. Yeah. I just didn't like this job anymore. Like mine, I have sort of this like storied history of like compounding things that made me want to reinvent. But some people are just like, man, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I'm starting a podcast of my own, and my podcast partner, she just didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And, so stories of reinvention are fascinating and so important to share because sometimes we don't hear all the things that go into it.
Yeah, yes, like yours and hers, I feel are so important because when you are at that, like when I was at my bottom, it was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. I wanted to not only change my professional life, I needed to change my personal one as a personal reinvention as well. Yeah. So hearing other people's stories is encouraging and helps us know that we're not on little islands by ourselves, right?
No. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And can you give us your website again?
Yes, my website is thewavybrain.com. So THEWAVYBRAIN.com. And that's my email is the same. So Lindsay at The Wavy Brain, and my Instagram is The Wavy Brain, and I'm The Wavy Brain everywhere on all the socials. Awesome.
All right, Lindsay, thank you so much. All right.
Thanks, Kim.
All right. Good luck.
Bye.
Thanks.